Hello and welcome everyone. This is Mike Azevedo here, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about colors and how I think about them. So the first idea that I wanted to mention to you guys is the color wheel, and I made this one quickly on Sketchbook Pro just to show how colors relate to each other. This is the same color wheel we have on Sketchbook Pro on the color editor, and the idea is that when I'm using the color wheel and when I'm thinking about colors, I'm sliding through it. I'm going from one point to the other. I'm not really just switching it entirely, but I'm sliding the color wheel from one point to the other. And I think about that spatially in a way. So when I think about colors, I think about going from one color to the other. I'm walking on the color wheel and getting to another point. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think it's the best way to walk on the color wheel and navigate yourself through it. And what the color wheel does is put color on context. Like you can see the relations that colors have with each other, and it's always like this. A color never exists alone. It's always existing in relation to the colors around it or the colors opposite to it. You always have to consider the other colors when you're using one color, right? So let's imagine a situation here. We have a ball, a red ball, which is initially like this on the left, and it's being lit by a blue light source. And this blue light source, what it does to the ball is that it makes the area that it hits more towards the blue. So it kind of drags the red towards the blue. It's going to go towards that blue color, that blue hue. So you're going to walk a little bit on the color wheel and you're going to understand that if you use a bright red on this area, it's not going to feel like it's being lit by a blue light source. And if you just add blue, it's going to be too strong. It's not going to be in context. It's not going to be really subtle. So the idea is that something in between is the answer. So you walk from the red towards that blue, but you most of the time end up in some area in between those two colors. So it's not really blue and it's not really red. It's something like a purplish area. And since we're dealing with a circle with a color wheel, it's obvious that we're going to have two ways to go, two ways to navigate on our color wheel. The first one was going from red towards blue, just passing through the purple area, and the other is going towards the oranges and the yellows and the greens and getting towards blue. But it gets very easy when you actually think about it, because it doesn't make sense. A red object getting so much blue light that it gets green, that it becomes orange. It doesn't make sense because those colors don't add up. You have to go a long way. And I always try to do it like that. I try to actually say it and think about it. And the rule is that you should never cross the complementary color of the objects. So if the object is red, you must never cross the green because it doesn't reflect that hue. The red object does not reflect green. It only absorbs the green. And now you may ask me, dude, what happens in a complementary color situation? For instance, you have a green ball and a red light source or something like that. And the thing is that we're going to need to understand a few things to go into that concept. So we're going to explore that at the end of the video, which is something called color constancy. But let's get back to the situation. There's a red ball being lit by a blue light source, and at the moment we know that we should always take the short route. And the amount you're going to go from one color to the other depends on a few factors. The first one is material, how reflective the object is. So if it's a very metal looking ball, it's going to reflect a lot of that blue light source and it's going to become more blue because it reflects towards our eyes more of that blue. And if it's more like a cloth looking ball, it's not going to reflect as much. It's going to absorb more and it's not going to become super blue and super bright. The other factor is intensity, how strong that light source is, because if it is a very strong blue light source, it's going to affect everything. It's going to make everything blue. It doesn't really matter. And the other thing is distance, how far the light source is, especially if it's a small light source like candlelight or something like that. It's going to lose a lot of its effectiveness. because it's further away from the object. And the last one is the actual color. So if it's a blue light source, or if it's a yellow light source, it's gonna affect the resulting color as well. So those factors are really gonna change the final look. And if you do that correctly, if you consider them properly, you're gonna have a much easier time creating a painting in which the colors really feel like they belong together. There's no odd color or weird temperature happening. Everything feels like it's being lit by the same light source, and it makes sense. And I know it seems pretty simple to deal with one ball, but the challenge comes when you start dealing with multiple objects, when you start dealing with different materials and different colors of the objects, and it's very difficult to deal with a lot of things. So I would advise you to practice a lot from life, like doing still lifes, painting objects from imagination later to apply the knowledge, looking at other artists' work, see how they deal with it, and try to slowly build up that library of understanding every color and understanding where you are locating yourself in the color wheel, and of course understanding where to slide in the color wheel and where not to slide. And it's interesting because by doing that, what you do is that you limit the color wheel. So you only use a slice of it. You don't use the entire thing. And if the light source is strong enough, it's going to limit the color wheel a lot. You're going to use only a small, tiny bit of the color wheel, which is the section around the color of the light source, which is very interesting because you have a very tiny space to work with. So you're going to work a lot with saturation, you're going to work a lot with value, and not so much with hue. You're going to only do small variations. But even those small variations in the correct situation can make a huge difference. Like you can see right now, his face looks warm, his face looks red, orange in a way, but it's actually purple. It's actually a very desaturated purple. But since everything else is super blue, by comparison, by context, your eye sees that, perceives that as orange or as something warmer, but just because it's slightly warmer. So those are the situations that I'm talking about, where you can see that colors are not constant. They change and change a lot depending on the situation. And for me, it becomes sort of like a game. How much can I play within those boundaries, within those variations, and how much can I get out with? And it's a pretty fun game when you start understanding how far you can go and using the light source as a filter. This is super helpful for me, and I hope it was helpful for you too. And for this painting, I was using my Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, large, which allows me to do very dynamic line drawing, which is very good for this stage. And I was using Sketchbook Pro doing some lines for structure. I really like to do structure before I do colors and lighting most of the times because it allows me to just work on that, just follow the structure and then worry about the colors. Right now you can see that I'm adding base colors on this night, which I named Clayton. And I'm using colors that are 50 to 70% dark, and they are not super saturated because I can add those things later if I want to. Right now I'm adding some form shadows and cast shadows, and I'm using a hard light layer with some oranges, and you can see that I'm variating a little bit, using some darker tones for accents. You can see on the cast shadows I'm using darker tones on the nostrils, underneath the eyes, and I'm using that to emphasize the form a bit more because those shadows are a bit darker. I'm using the orange because I want sort of a soft blue light, and I want to do that by comparison. By adding orange to the shadows, the light's gonna feel more blue because it's the opposite color. It always works like that, and I think it's a good way to start because you don't deal with super strong brightness and super strong blues. You start by slowly building up that relationship, and later in the process I can decide if I want to keep the subtlety or add the blue to the image. You can see that I'm adding more accents on the shadows and adding some colors underneath, so you can see the armor right there is having some colors, the cloth, and I'm adding some more geometric shapes for the shadows. You can see they resemble triangles, and I'm adding some background elements so I could compare the character better to the background. You can see that I have very uh, it's nice because I can have very big movements. And right now I added a darken layer so I could unify a little bit the shadows and the light area using a dark blue so the character feels like it belongs to that environment. I'm adding some highlights to the character, not much. I'm using a glow layer to do that, and I'm not adding much because I don't want the character to be metallic, right? I want him to feel like he's made of skin. And even though it's reflective, but not too much. Especially when you compare it to the armor, which is very reflective and it almost gets to white. And you can see that I'm adding some dark tones around the character and having some big, nice dynamic movements to direct the vision to the character. And I could delete the lines now and still work on the character because the structure is already there. And I'm adding some rim light for effect on the volume. It also helps me to define some more form. And I'm doing some small details right now. You can see that that was the first time that I zoomed in a little while ago. And I don't like to zoom in too much because if I do, I probably get lost in detail and forget about colors. And you can see that I didn't actually add that much blue to the color of the light, but I can feel the blue, and by adding the orange, that's a good way to do that. I'm adding some more oranges and reds, especially to the nose and cheeks, so he feels like he has more blood flowing. And now it's time to work within those boundaries, make some variations and some details on the ears and some details on the mouth, and work within those boundaries, making small adjustments. And he's pretty much done. So I wanted to remember one last time. Find the color of the object, find the color of the light source, use that as a filter to your painting, and work within the subtleties and limitations. So thank you for Autodesk and Wacom for providing such great stuff for artists, and thank you all for listening. I hope it was helpful for you. I wish you a lot of fun in your paintings, and I see you around, guys.